Hi Michael, I'm just so happy to talk to you today. It's been a long time coming for us to sit down and talk about what we actually only speak about in private. And the impetus to make it public has been very strong recently, given what humanity is going through collectively and everyone individually. And I just want to preface the whole conversation with my gratitude for being a bit of a teacher for me, you know, showing up as a teacher and an interpreter of Rudolf Steiner's work, also known as Steiner in Germany and Bulgaria, where I'm from, and his spiritual science and the esoterics that he was able to tap into in order to see what's behind the veil and what's behind the historic events that are steering human history. And I feel that his work is so relevant in this day and age, and we need to look at it through a contemporary lens, and you've been my primary influence in being able to decode some of these messages. So today I'm really burning to talk about my #1 subject of concern, which is the development of technologies such as artificial intelligence and other innovations of technology that are positioned and being ushered in to take over the human spirit and to become surrogates for true human connection and evolution on a spiritual level, but also on a psychological, moral level as well. So I'm not going to mention any names in order to not trigger the algorithms or try to avoid that, but we know that certain transnational organizations that have members that have not been elected by the populace of the world are exerting a lot of influence, and they are predicting and telling us that our biological identity will merge with our digital identity, will merge with our digital IDs potentially, and it will be indeed a beautiful utopian technological vision becoming manifest and self-regulating and leading to a fair society where everyone's needs are met. So can we start by addressing some of these ideologues of the day, and what do you think they are ushering us into? It's a big question.
It's a big question.
Let's start with the big question so we get everyone's attention.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here. I should probably start by prefacing anything I say are my own views and my own understandings of Rudolf Steiner's work, which is vast, very vast, though I've been studying it for. I came to Anthroposophy maybe 23 years ago, and I've been studying it seriously probably for 15 years. Still, there's so much knowledge, not just in his work, but in the actual practice of Anthroposophy, which is what keeps us up to date in the spiritual world. So my views are my own, and any errors I make are my own and not Rudolf Steiner's. So I just wanted to be clear about that. So I also draw from other traditions and obviously modern thinkers as well. So yeah, this is the question of the day. This is the big question of the day for most people who are aware of what's going on in the world, and for esotericists. Esotericists, you know, anyone worth their salt, they're not just sitting in their tower, their ivory towers, you know, reading and studying. They're very much trying to keep up with understanding what are the hidden forces behind the scene of world events. And that is the value of the study of Rudolf Steiner's work, is known as spiritual science or anthroposophy, because it allows one to peer behind the veil that is opaque to most people, not only through the eyes of Rudolf Steiner or other anthroposophists, but through our own, ideally through our own eyes, through our own spiritual experiences. And I've been lucky enough to have quite a number of those myself, so I draw on that knowledge as well. So yeah, what is happening here? This is the big question, but we could maybe, I don't even know where do you want to start with that question.
Well, it sounds to me like 100 years ago, Steiner was not a big fan of technology. I mean, he wasn't anti-technology. He was understanding it was part of the natural evolution of where we're headed. But why was he so skeptical of electricity itself? Why was he warning us about other changes that are potentially coming that may steer us off course?
Yes. Well, he was I would say he was skeptical. He was aware of the nature of technology and the dangers it posed. But he definitely was not a Luddite. He grew up on the railroads, which were very brand new at the time. His father worked for the railroad, so he grew up spending a lot of time, actually in and amongst one of the most modern technologies at the time in terms of transportation. And even later, when electricity became available in the building of the building known as the Gutianum, he insisted that Anthroposophy should stay in the modern world, and it was built wired for electricity rather than, say, oil lamps, which were, still more prevalent in the day. So he was still embracing technology to a certain extent, but he had certain limits, like he refused to go on radio, for example, even though radio was now becoming popular, and then later on it was utilized obviously in the war efforts for propaganda. But he was very skeptical of technology because he understood the being behind technology. And that's something in our modern materialistic way of thinking, we don't think in terms of beings, we think in terms of personal forces. But from a spiritual perspective, everything is alive, everything is a being. And it's only our reductionist, materialistic, what Steiner called brain-bound thinking that causes us to kill the spiritual being behind the thing in itself, and to erect in its place an impersonal force rather than understand that there's a being behind it. So Steiner did understand the being behind technology, the being, the supersensible being, who is the one who has gifted us in a certain sense. And even though that gift is a double-edged sword, he has gifted us with all of the technology we have from the printing press onward. And you think, well, of course the printing press, what a wonderful achievement that was. It allowed people to, all of a sudden, who didn't have access now to have access to knowledge, even say the Bible, for example. Previously you'd have to go to church, and you were dependent on the church and the pastor in order to even understand the Bible. Now all of a sudden the printing press made knowledge more widely accessible. The challenge, of course, is that it now it began to degrade the human faculty, which previously learned largely through words, through sharing, through stories. Right? People used to be able to recite thousands and thousands of pages of poems and books, and the knowledge was passed on verbally, and gradually that faculty diminished with the printing press. Just as today, as we see more and more children today don't even know how to write because they're on a keyboard. The faculty for writing and our faculty for memory is diminished because we no longer need to remember things. Our phones can remember things for us. So there's a double-edged sword with technology in the way that it provides a newfound gift, but at the same time it can take something away from the human being. And we're in the process now of having all of these gifts piled upon us, all of these dangerous gifts that we're not really ready for, morally, spiritually. Mm-hmm. So Steiner was apprehensive because he foresaw what was coming. The name of this being he gave, he actually carved this being in wood, and he gave this, the leader of this group of beings, he named Ahriman. This is also known in Christian esotericism as Mephistopheles, a very high-rank spiritual being that is really a being of cold, calculating, infinite intelligence, and it's the one that stands behind all the modern inventors, scientists, technocrats. Is this being? It's his genius. It's not their genius. They're just the puppets the vessels or vehicles. You know, when somebody comes up with this great new invention, you can't think it's that scientist per se who's invented this. No, it's that scientist who's perceived, who has gleaned, who has been, you know, inculcated with this knowledge, and then brings it to the world.
So here's a facet of reality we're not aware of because of our materialistic thinking. So turns out technology is not just a bunch of minerals and whatever contained in your cell phone. I mean, you're saying there's a being that's orchestrating and guiding this process that we're unaware of, for one.
Sure.
But you're also saying this being is not adversarial to us in its nature, in its core. It's only because of the excess of how we utilize technology that it becomes potentially a negative influence? Or
yes, I mean it's a lawful being. That is, it is given a lawful place by the higher being called God, the Father God, and then we can talk about the pantheon of beings and where all of these beings reside. But this being is permitted to operate, and is even permitted an incarnation. And Steiner predicted the coming incarnation, that is the physical, this being would take a physical embodiment in a human vessel before even a part of the 21st century had passed. Mm-hmm. So esotericists have been, you know, trying to study and figure out who this being might be. Has he already come down? When might he come down? And where will he be born, and what will his impact be? Because there are three, along with Christ and another being. Steiner is known in Christianity as Lucifer, the being responsible for the fall. These three beings have all been accorded, according to the universal law, one incarnation, one physical incarnation. So Christ, this being referred to as Christ or the Logos, we can talk about who this being is in much more depth, but he took an incarnation through the vehicle of Jesus. We're all aware of this story. We're not aware, Steiner's the only one I'm aware of who points out that the other being known as Lucifer, who was responsible for the fall in Genesis, took an incarnation in China about 3000 BC. And some have referred to the Yellow Emperor as that incarnation.
okay, I think we're skipping ahead into some specifics before we even establish that it's the backbone of Anthroposophy, who Steiner is the founder of, to accept incarnation as a fact, reincarnation as a spiritual fact.
Yes.
Like, we're not going to spend time debating here whether reincarnation is true or not, but it's one of the tenets of Anthroposophy. And it sounds to me, when you first started explaining to me how many beings, I was like, wow, that's a populated spiritual universe that we're not aware of. We think of things as down here and up there, but actually these worlds are interpenetrating, and these beings are with us at all times. Yes,
all of those folks that are infatuated with ETs and aliens, you know, because they say it's just improbable, it's so impossible to think we're the only sentient life in the universe. They have some intuition, which is absolutely correct. Of course we're not the only sentient life. Their error and mistake in their materialistic thinking is to conceive of other life as physical life. They don't realize there are cities on the moon and on all the planets populated with beings and civilizations that we can faintly comprehend, you know, not to mention all of the space in between, and you know, everything we perceive here, from minerals to plants to animals, are also spiritual beings. You know, they have spiritual counterparts that we can come into contact with. Not to mention the deceased, the dead. That Steiner says the dead are with us. We can't perceive the dead. Some people feel the dead if they are close to a loved one who passes. But Steiner was very clear that the dead are with us. And in fact, we have a duty to help them and to guide them even here.
And let's mention very briefly how this knowledge was sourced. Steiner was clairvoyant and was reading from the Akashic Records, which is how do you describe the Akashic Records?
Well, I mean, not only was he clairvoyant from a young age, but he was also well studied in modern philosophy and modern thinkers. So he had a very attuned, clear sense of thinking. But so he was clairvoyant, but he also had a new kind of clairvoyance, a clairvoyance that is, say, less mystical and more a more conscious clairvoyance. And that is, he was clairvoyant in a fully conscious state.
Correct. So
So
not
it's a
less
more-
mystical. I mean, it's still quite a mystical, enigmatic process, but with full consciousness.
Sure.
Rather than subduing the consciousness and inducing a trance-like state, or journeying with plant medicine, or any shamanic tradition that we're now modernizing and resurrecting so much the spiritual communities, especially, he was able to do this and perceive this and penetrate in his full consciousness.
In full consciousness,
which
yes.
is remarkable.
Which is,
Do you
yeah.
want to talk about that? I think he labeled it or called it a solar initiation,
Yeah.
as opposed to the lunar initiations that we are familiar with through the ancient mysteries and other societies.
Sure. I didn't answer your question about the Akashic Chronicle. I
Yeah.
can tackle that one first, which is the Akashic Chronicle is a record of all life that has taken place, and it exists on a higher plane. There's both the Akashic Chronicle and the astral light, which is its reflection. I'm sorry, it's reflection in the astral light. They call this the Akashic record. So sometimes people say I'm reading from the Akashic record, but they're actually reading from the astral light,
Interesting.
which is the lower.
Lower astral realm.
It's not the higher Devachan, the lower Devachan, as it's referred to in Buddhism. So it's the lower, it's the mirror image of the Akashic Chronicle. It's a stepped down version, so it's subject to errors. So anyone reading, and only really the highest initiates have been able to penetrate into the Akashic Chronicle, the real record in the higher spiritual domains. And he was able to do that in full consciousness. And there have been others, but we have to recognize this is a very substantial feat to be able to do this. And it is a record of basically everything that's taken place, a holographic record in which one can enter into and actually experience from the perspective of anyone there what they were thinking, what they were feeling, what was taking place in a very, very nuanced and very detailed way as well. It's just imagine, like we can maybe imagine it with our technological ideas of virtual reality, being able to go into a scene, or just in our imagination, we can say, what would that be like? But he was able to go and penetrate into, say, what happened, and he wrote a book called The Fifth Gospel, in which he examines some aspects of the life of Jesus Christ and brings out stories and examples from Jesus' life that were previously unknown. Yeah.
Okay, so from specifics such as this, the life of Jesus Christ, all the way through a much larger cosmology of eons of time throughout which human history has evolved, he has really crafted quite a body of work that you're informed by for the past 20 years plus, correct?
Sure. Yeah.
And so I just want to go back full circle to the idea that all these beings that you're mentioning have their lawful place in the cosmology of human history. When does it start to become an imbalance? When there's a hijacking, right? When does it become unlawful? Like, what are we, let's come back to contemporary time, the role of technology, all the institutions, governments that are upholding it as the solution to every single problem that we've inherited or created or co-created. And where is the imbalance stemming from?
Well, the imbalance happens when the human beings themselves, who have been granted free will, allow these beings more space in their consciousness and in their lives than is rightful. Okay, so it's the human beings, it's us who have allowed these group of beings, because I just want to take one step back, because Rudolf Steiner mentioned this being Ahriman, but he also said he's the leader or the head of a class of beings, which Steiner referred to as Ahrimanic beings. We could refer to them as maybe demonic beings, but there's certain sort of maybe inaccurate ideas we get from Hollywood movies or so forth with these beings, or we could simply call them beings, fallen angels. In fact, these are actually fallen archangels. They would be archangels today, okay, if they had graduated, if they had stayed on a progressive path, but they did not, and they chose a regressive path, a materialistic path, a technological path. So,
and I just want to examine. Many people have different connotations to the word fallen. I think Steiner has a bit of a different connotation. So fallen is like seceding from the cosmic order, right?
Yeah, I mean, you look at in every, what's known as a manvantara, okay, in every age, in every cosmic age, and we're living in, Steiner says right now, in what we would call from the Big Bang, which is all science knows, this is the fourth manvantara, or it's the fourth day, okay, and we can refer to it as the fourth day in the book of Genesis as well. There were 3 previous iterations of the universe, and in each iteration of the universe, a class of beings is allowed, it's given free will. Just like right now, we are the beings that have free will, human beings.
Just in this epoch, or?
Just in this epoch.
Really?
Yeah.
Before we did not?
We did not have the capacity for free will. The capacity for free will only develops with the eye, the human eye, and we have to talk about, that gets into what is a human being, what are the bodies of a human being, and it is the eye, the capacity of the eye itself, and that begins to, where we begin to have the capacity for free will, and the development of the different levels of soul. The eye works upon our soul. There are three aspects of soul: feeling soul, the mind soul, and the consciousness soul. Okay. So free will arises over time through an evolutionary process as we begin to develop our consciousness soul, our highest level of soul capacity. The eye is able to, we get to the stage where we are now able to think freely, to have really full freedom and the capacity for full freedom. Rudolf Steiner said that date specifically occurred in 1899, was the end of a cycle known as the Kali Yuga. That was a 5,000-year period of the darkening of our consciousness, so that we could, of our clairvoyance, I'm sorry. Our clairvoyance, we used to be clairvoyant beings, but that faculty needed to be suppressed so that we could develop our intellectual soul. Okay. Now that we developed it fully, we were meant at the turn of the 19th, 20th century, we were meant to freely choose a spiritual path, and sadly we didn't at that time. So we could look at that as another fall, but the original fall was known obviously referred to in Genesis is the fall of human beings from the garden, from a oneness, from a unity with
so that's really the fall, or the original sin. I mean, it's not the conventional treatment that the Bible gives it. Steiner has a different read on it.
Yeah, it's
it's basically separation from oneness in order for us to evolve and individuate. But there's a purpose to the individuation. It's not, as mistakenly people assume, that individuation results in individualism, and not just individualism, but toxic individualism. I feel there's a confusion between individuation and individualism in today's spiritual communities and society at large.
Sure.
And it's seen as a negative because it's not understood that it's the end result of a very, very long process. And a sacrifice of other spiritual beings.
Yes.
Okay.
The fall, why the fall was not a lawful process, and that's why sort of Lucifer and the other angels, a third of the angels that went with him were punished in a way, why they fell with humanity from the higher heavens, was that even though humanity was meant to develop
Mm-hmm.
his intellect, we were meant to be able to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That is, you think, prior we didn't have knowledge of good and evil. We weren't aware of our nakedness in the garden, as the story goes.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as we ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we had now an awareness of our nakedness. We saw the distinction that we previously didn't. We were more like nature beings previously,
Right.
nature spiritual beings.
Can I just ask one
Yeah.
clarification? This fall, is it a fall into duality? And the state that existed prior does not have inherent duality to it, this oneness? Or did this oneness also possess duality characteristics?
Well,
Because we're essentially good and evil, we're falling into duality in this realm.
yeah, it
Mhm.
is a fall in terms of our awareness of ourselves
Mm-hmm.
as separate beings. Right? Before we were just like the animals and unconscious of ourselves as separate. We didn't have the intellectual capacity. So the gift of Lucifer
Mm-hmm.
was actually the gift of light. Lucifer is the angel of light, the bringer of light,
Mm-hmm.
light or intelligence, through tempting us to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So that is, he gives us this capacity now to differentiate, right, in a dualistic sense. Good and evil, right and wrong, naked or clothed. We have this aspect through Lucifer, but Lucifer's sin, his transgression, was that human beings were not really ready at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
The higher creator gods, what we could refer to, say, as the Elohim, or the Exousiai, they had not granted that. Lucifer sort of did it out of somewhat of a prideful pity in human beings.
Mm-hmm.
So we gave into that temptation against God's prohibition, and therefore we fell, and Lucifer fell because he went against the higher gods. So it does end up giving us this gift that we're using today to have this conversation,
Yeah.
and without which we wouldn't even recognize ourselves as a human species.
Mm-hmm.
But it came with it came a whole bunch of problems, of which we're now still dealing with. And the higher progressive gods had to sort of now try to figure out how to deal with these problems that were, of this early premature entry of our intellect. And but that was during sort of that fall happened in what Steiner refers to as the Lemurian age. That's pre-Atlantis.
Mm-hmm.
So in Steiner's cosmology, we're in the fifth post-Atlantean epoch
Yes.
of time. And if you look 10,000 years ago, that was the deluge, the Noah's flood.
Mm-hmm.
That was the end of the Atlantean
Mm-hmm.
epoch. Prior to that was a civilization known as the Lemurian epoch, and that is when the fall happened, when human beings fell into what we could say duality, awareness of duality.
Okay, I mean, I think with full awareness, this is such a vast cosmology. I think it will take many, many series of videos to explain. I'm trying to steer us closer to the contemporary day and age, but without the explanation, we're just flattening the content. So we took a little detour to explain some of these tenets of anthroposophy and an understanding of how we ended up where we are. Okay, so we're in the freest of times for the human being, spiritual being in earth garments, and yet we're having these counter forces coming in from all directions to limit, restrict our freedom, hijack our path of evolution.
Yeah, well, because now the human being's up for grabs. I mean, we are the prize. We are, as Steiner referred to, the religion of the gods. Think about that. We think of the gods as our religion. For those that are religious or spiritual, we look up to gods of various kinds. And Steiner says humanity is the religion of the gods.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're the project of the gods.
Why are we the religion of the gods? Why would they need a religion? I want to contemplate.
Well, we'll leave that open for contemplation, because I think it's a deep contemplation, because he also said we are the 10th, we are the emerging 10th hierarchy of love and freedom. So that's the part of the answer is right embedded in that. Because the other, well, I mean, the gods live up in a realm they have not descended to our degree of descent. And until before Christ, none of them even knew death. They didn't even know what death was. And so the being Christ, the Logos, the Word, this very high being, you know, we can talk about in more depth, he was the first God to experience death in a human body. And that was very, so we are here experiencing freedom. You know, these higher spiritual beings operate in a unity, in a kind of you know, cohesion and harmony.
Yeah.
Whereas human beings have the capacity for disharmony. And that is the double-edged sword of freedom. We're meant to choose love. We're meant to, out of this free will choice, choose love, choose the higher progressive gods. But instead, now this leaves opportunities for other beings like this fallen, you call them a regressive being, to tempt humanity into another path. That is the technological path. I think that's what we're here today, to try to figure out how this deception is playing out through this being. And there's also another being that enters into the scene that we can talk about as well, because we're actually at the point now in which there are two very significant esoteric, well, we could say two very challenging, okay, I call them dark esoteric cycles that are transpiring. One is the advent or the incarnation of this being known as Ahriman, or Mephistopheles, this being of cold, calculating, infinite intelligence that is giving us technology. And at the same time, there's another significant event happening since around 1998. And that is the return of.
Let's not freak people out.
Well,
let's not freak people out.
One
right?
enough?
We haven't even gotten to the subject of AI yet.
Okay.
We have not. We have not. And we started there. So.
Well, I think this ties into it.
Yeah.
This ties into it because in esotericists have been asking themselves for a while, and this goes back to the reference in the Book of Revelations to this being referred to as the Antichrist, or the 666. Rudolf Steiner deciphered the name of this being, or the significance of the 666, which was a code written in the Jewish gematria, which was a way of veiling a name within a number. And in one of his lectures, he gave the name of this being.
Which we shall not speak here.
We shall not speak. But
because it actually invokes the energy of the being, correct? We have to be cautious.
Sure, but we shouldn't be afraid either, because
we're not
fear
afraid
is,
either. But okay, but it's not a schooling in that kind of.
We don't need to. Those that are interested can go look up that lecture. But the fact of the matter is, this being, the 666 being, also operates lawfully within a cycle of every 666 years. He's permitted, he's sort of kept at bay, held at bay within the deepest layers of hell, what we call hell. But he's permitted lawfully to test or tempt humanity in a very, very strong way every 666 years post-Christ. And Steiner talked about the first two incidences, the first two attacks on humanity. These are actually attacks on the Christ. This is being, he also referred to as the sun demon. Okay, and this being is permitted every 666 years. So 666 times 3 gives us the date of 1998. So esotericists have been asking for quite a while now, what event in and around 1998 should we look for to indicate to us?
Is it 1998 or 1996?
1998. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 1998. What should we be looking for to indicate the signs of this being, so that we can be aware and wary, because we're going to be tempted in a very difficult way? So I meditated on that for quite some time, and after reading as much as I could on the subject, and I had an intuition to Google. And what did I come
Okay, disclosure time, everybody. Michael figured it out.
Yes.
He Googled Google.
I Googled Google, and what do I find in the first entry under Wikipedia? Google was born, or incorporated, as a company is, in the year 1998. So if you say, wow, and there's lots of companies incorporated in the year 1998, well, what does Google have to do with it? Well, if you just look at Google today, you can see in the short period of time since 1998, we have the world's probably most powerful company, most influential company. It's the gateway in which most people get their information and truth into the world. It has the leading AI, DeepMind. Okay.
Has meaning owns.
It owns
Yeah.
the world's most powerful artificial intelligence, referred to as DeepMind. The Google's director of engineering is Ray Kurzweil, the head of the Singularity Institute, and one of the leading proponents of transhumanism. Their operating system, what's it called? Android. It gives you a very indication of what they would like. They would like to digitize all knowledge. They would like to go back to the Time magazine some years ago. They have a health division that's committed to try to overcoming death. And we can talk about why these beings would like to remain alive forever and overcome death. So in every indication you see Google as a leading proponent, certainly not the only company, but as the leading agent, I believe, of this force. And you see, of course, all these other tech giants, and they follow similar kinds of patterns. So I'm not saying it's exclusively Google, but we can see that any company that's following this kind of a transhumanist agenda, Henry Kurzweil once said, we will not have technology, we will be technology.
He said that.
Yes.
So we dropped two terms. We need to clarify. One is transhumanism and the other one is singularity. When I first met you, I wasn't quite clear on these terms. They're not really widely discussed in popular media.
Sure.
Yeah. So what is singularity, first of all, as a concept?
Why don't we tackle transhumanism?
Transhumanism.
It's an easier one.
Okay,
maybe
great.
Yeah. Transhumanism is simply any form of the development of the human being that transcends its current state of evolution. How it's used by technological transhumanists is that we will upgrade the human being through merging with technology.
Right.
And therefore we will become transhuman, superhuman, post-human. And they look at this as a serious upgrade and an evolutionary advantage, of which they say, okay, do we want to be left behind? Do you want to, like Elon Musk says, do you want to be like the house cat of the artificial intelligence, or do you want to be like their pet? If not, you're going to have to keep up with them and integrate yourself with an AI that, of course, he will help you. He will deliver through his neural lace as a solution to keep up with the intelligence race. So the merging of human being with technology is how it's largely utilized by those who are promoting it as the way forward. And that leads to the singularity. The singularity is the concept that at a given point in time, a number of key trends will merge, and that will lead to some event that is referred to as a singularity, in which it is posited that, and most of those trends you can look at are, say, the exponential growth of computer processing power, the exponential miniaturization through nanotechnology.
Singularity is that point in human history where machines start to outdo human beings and become more powerful than human beings? In their computational power, and what else?
Singularity is the point it's perceived in which certain technological trends will converge to allow for the potential or the inevitability, as some people believe, of an emergence of a new entity, which we could refer to as a general artificial intelligence. the general, today we have artificial intelligence, but a general artificial intelligence would be the next step, whereby it can, in effect, become an all-purpose, look at all of the AIs together, combine them all together, and multiply it by a significant exponential factor, and you would have a general artificial intelligence. That would be, they posit, would be sentient, would be a evolutionary step in intelligence.
So it's like a consolidation of all these other facets of AIs and different developments that become connected and coordinated.
Yes, through miniaturization, through nanotechnology, through the development and the mapping of the human genome, the understanding of the human genome, right, and through the development of the massive exponential growth in computer processing power that we would, and through the development and growth of these artificially intelligent, neural networks, the capacity would then. And they're positing this to happen between 2033 and 2045, so it's not that far into the future. Yeah. Some have even said earlier, but typically those are the dates given. And we see how fast things are moving today, so we can see that certainly there's a long way to go in some regards, but it's that curve is exponential. It's happening so fast that even though that long way to go happened very quickly.
Right.
And at that moment of the singularity in which this posited artificially intelligent super being arises, which they think is inevitable and a wonderful thing. All those other people say this could be the demise of humanity at the same time.
Oh, it's sort of like the new technological God, a technological supreme being. The all-knowing, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent.
Yes.
Aren't these the characteristics of God when we try to describe God? And in that sense, why are we concerned with this? What are our reservations about it? Are we just concerned in terms of we're afraid to go into this brave new world and leave behind the human being as is? Is it just our trepidation, our fear of change, which is how normally our perspective is critiqued as, we're just fearful of change, and there's always been a fear of change and progress in humanity, and people are resistant and retrograde in their ideas. I think we're concerned for deeper reasons than just losing the upper hand in certain things,
Sure. Yeah, I like the way you put that. It is, in a sense, humanity since time immemorial. We've been searching for God, and now that we've developed this intellectual capacity, is the gifts of Ahriman we spoke about, which are actually not our own, but the gifts of this, we call it retarded or backwards entity. Then we've developed the capacity to facilitate technology into the world to now create God, or our understanding of God. So you mentioned these three aspects: omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and we can certainly see that in technology, how powerful technology is, and we can imagine an artificially generally intelligent, an AGI being would in an interconnected world. Right, that has now this probably an IQ that would be combined would exceed all human beings, together. Like we're talking about an IQ that would be off the scale. Well, maybe not initially. This is the big question: is how long would it take for the AGI to become an ASI, an artificially super intelligent entity? And some posit it could take hours or days. It could be very, very quick. And then we end up with, obviously, huge concerns, which are shared by most people who understand the space of what they refer to as the alignment problem. If you give all this power, all this knowledge, has access to all of this data is being mined, to have access to all of these databases, all this knowledge about us in the world, omnipresent, be interconnected in this age of the Internet of Things, and the growing internet of bodies, which they're trying to have every human being connected to. So it will, in effect, be
connected to, let's say, smart devices, the grid, your fridge.
Yeah, sure. Sure, of course. You know, they want to have us integrated as much as possible, and all of these technologies, we will merge with them, we will become them, we will take them into our bodies, we'll augment our biology, so maybe start with health monitoring of our heart and of our brain waves and of all of these things that seem so good. Little devices implanted, you know, the neural lace into our brain.
Oh, they're not even, maybe not even implanted. The tracking and tracing of health data is really concerning in itself, even without the invasiveness of under the skin, to my mind. I mean, these are Bluetooth, Wi-Fi operated devices that impact our health in the negative, I'd like to mention. And
But what they would like to have us do is to willfully, choose to have these devices within us, so that all of our data, and people are already doing it now, all of the data can be mapped, can be accessed about our biology, so that at any given time they will know our individual heart signature, our brainwave patterns, what we think. And China's already doing this even with school children on the level of seeing if they're paying attention in school.
correct,
Right.
yeah, they wear these
And workers.
headbands to show concentration or distraction.
Sure.
So, where is this going, and why is the majority of humanity perceiving this as a positive, exciting frontier for human development? Is it, I mean, do we associate technology with a form of magic? Are we enamored with any technological advance that gives us convenience and comfort? What other reasons are there spiritually that right now we're prone to this type of manipulation, do you think?
Well, how evil works generally is to take something, and we can call this evil in the sense of its ultimately how this Antichrist sun demon being is operating. We can say Steiner was pretty clear that the Ahrimanic beings that give us the technology is not in itself evil, but the intentions of this other being that we're now seeing since 1998 to come to test humanity is what we would call evil, because it has a destructive impulse.
Right.
The impulse of the Ahrimanic beings is not destructive. It's a gift that's given. We can use it or choose to use it for good or for ill. But the impulse of the sun demon is destructive. So we can ultimately now, we could use the word evil in this term, right?
We didn't even define the sun demon, and that is that the Christ is a solar being that descended into the earth realm. And through this process, through this alchemical process, created its shadow, or its duality opposite, which is kind of a universal spiritual law, correct? Like, we have our own shadow, our own double. So the Christ being so highly evolved, created its own kind of adversarial, antagonistic being. Is that how it occurred? Like, when was this sun demon being born?
Well, these are the deep mysteries that Steiner refers to us needing to unveil and unravel. And now, the mystery of Michael, the mysteries of Christ, and the mysteries of this sun demon. So, yes, there is indications that any being entering from the higher heavens into duality has to maintain certain polarity. There is another being that's you could call the shadow or the double. And so I don't want to speculate too much on that, because I haven't, the genesis or the origin of this being, because I haven't studied it enough myself.
Sure.
And haven't had enough experiences, because one should not delve into such deep things without the real clear protection of the Christ. And that's fairly clear. When we delve into the mysteries of evil, we need the Christ being. We need to be so fully integrated with and connected to the Christ being for our own protection. Otherwise, we can find ourselves over our heads very easily.
Here's a little guidance demo for you. Oh, you have some? You have some left?
I have some. Yeah.
Okay. Cheers. So, inevitably, well, we mapped out some of the influences and where technology is going, but we didn't really give it the proper treatment. I mean, technology is being proposed as the savior of humanity, which displaces the Christ being and displaces our organic evolutionary timeline. And it was, you and I were intuiting some big events were coming before 2020. We couldn't quite put our finger on it. And in March 2020, we were like, no, in February actually, when it happened in the health realm, you know, technology as the savior in the health realm, that was that first exercise or that drill that we just went through that is trying to have a comeback this fall.
Yes, sure.
So
let me just tackle your earlier question.
Yeah.
Why is it that most human beings are susceptible to this story or to this temptation? And it is a very, one could trace it back to maybe even the story of the temptation of Christ in the wilderness, because in that one of the temptations is, and Steiner refers to this as the temptation of the being Ahriman, is the temptation for Christ to turn stones into bread. So if you're the Christ, then turn stones into bread. If you're God, turn these stones into bread. And what is that temptation? This is a very important question, because these temptations are given to us as archetypal temptations of all of us, of each of us, that we have to confront, not just once, but ongoingly. And this temptation, as I understand it, is the temptation to turn that which is dead, to get life from that which is dead.
Wow, profound. This is exactly what technology is doing. It's enlivening all these processes of interaction between us.
And we have to also look at what Christ's response were and how did he deal with these temptations. Well, his response was, man does not live on bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So the Christ had recently entered into, and according to Rudolf Steiner, Christ did not come in at the birth. This being Christ came in to prepare Jesus and his 30th year at the baptism of the Jordan. That's when John the Baptist saw the Spirit descending and heard the words of the Father. This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased. And this is the start of Christ's mission. So Christ has just freshly entered into, this high divine being has now entered into the human vessel and is now tempted for the first time to really try to answer this question. And his answer is, according to Steiner, only a partial response. It's a partial response because he didn't realize yet to the extent to which, it is true what he said. It's absolutely true. Man does not live on bread alone. Okay. But he does, because he has a physical vehicle, require bread. Right? He requires sustenance. Physical sustenance.
Yeah, so obviously on those grounds, we can all be coerced, threatened, manipulated.
Sure. If we didn't need the bread, we wouldn't have we wouldn't need this technology. It's the technology today that gives us the access to, and the temptation is for us to have more material abundance, more affluence, more power, more to live life, right, more fully, more successfully. So if we were spiritual, if we only needed spiritual substance, we wouldn't have a need for most of this stuff. Or most of these technological temptations wouldn't be necessary. We could, if we were breatharians, say, if we didn't have to work, we didn't need technology.
Well, can we say then by design we're vulnerable? We cannot really blame humans for being vulnerable at this stage.
Well, we can understand where our vulnerability comes from. The fact that we do have a physical vehicle, the challenge is the deception is, and it's been perpetuated for hundreds of years now, is for human beings to think that's all we are, to disregard our spiritual nature and realize we do not live on bread alone, that we are spiritual beings, that we do have multiple lifetimes and incarnate over time and evolve over time. And that's the challenge, is these gifts that are being given, these technological gifts, are meant to develop in us. We intuitively know we have this capacity, but they're going to take a lot longer to develop. And Ahriman, through this technology, gives these gifts instantaneously, and we don't have to do any work on our own.
So that is the ultimate temptation. You're saying because we are underdeveloped in our awareness of how powerful we are as spiritual beings, we're being handed these gizmos and these quick fixes to latch onto and become codependent on. And that robs us not only of our organic development, but it also merges us with something that we're not sure of its origin and its nature in terms of the beingness.
Well, Steiner's sure. We're not sure yet, but we can certainly meet these beings ourselves. And, but yeah, if we just look at one example and get it, make it more tangible, you look at the cell phone we use, or the telephone. We started with the telephone, now it's the cell phone, the mobile phone. Well, the telephone allows us to, over distance, to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Well, we also know we have the spiritual, and some human beings have had this capacity, have demonstrated this capacity, and have spoken about this capacity. And some cultures developed it. Maybe the Aboriginals, for example, were said to possess this capacity, which is the ability to be telepathic, to have conversations across time and space without any gadgets or gizmos.
Correct, and we've all experienced these serendipitous moments when we think of someone and they call us, or we meet them on the street.
Yeah.
Synchronicities of sorts. They're not they're not haphazard.
Sure, I've had this. When you become close to a partner, many people have had this experience. I've been in a store and just had a thought, oh, I should get this. Why? How did I? And you get home and your partner says, how did you know I needed that? I wanted that and I couldn't get in touch with you. Well, they sent a mental signal, and because we're connected, I was able to pick up that mental signal. Well, if we were to develop that consciously without technology, we have the capacity to do that. It's just going to take a lot longer. And it's a heck of a lot more convenient for us, and we like instant, and we like convenient to be able to pick up a phone and have a full communication, rather than wait many years of study and devotion and practices, and perhaps many lifetimes to fully develop this our spiritual capacities. So you can almost look at every gift of technology, and it's there to replace, to use, and it's getting back to what I said earlier, how evil uses the truth. It twists and reverses what is true, which is what we intuitively know, and it uses that to tempt us to take advantage of us, because so we think this thing is good, because we feel like, oh, this is, I know I'm meant to develop this, I know I'm meant to have these capacities of communication, ubiquitous communication, right? We should be able to tune into anyone and anywhere around the world. Well, we do have that capacity spiritually, but it takes a lot, you need to be an advanced initiate in this day and age to develop it. So
okay, so we realized, this has been an unplanned conversation. We didn't really structure it because we know that we're actually good students in the school of mystery. Wherever we go in conversation, we're meant to go. It's like a revelation for us, but also for the listener. We weren't really planning to broach certain topics, and we did. And we're happy with that. We're going to stand by it, and we're going to subdivide it probably into clips and sections, because we personally, you and I, we don't know of anyone having these conversations on social media, especially. Maybe on YouTube for a few select groups, but not really widely, not in the mainstream. And I am just so happy that we got to touch upon so many aspects.
Yeah, it's the intersection of deep esotericism and the modern technological crises.
Yes.
And trying to understand and get to the roots of this crisis, so that we're not duped, and because now we are being faced with the ultimate test of which direction will we choose to go in terms of our soul development, in terms of our spiritual development. What are we desiring out of our free will to unite with? Do we want to choose the path of merging with technology, the Aramonic temptation, which is to be fed not by the word of God, but by the dead minerals, right? We're being fed by the dead minerals, which all of our devices are comprised of. Or will we choose the path of spiritual technology? See, people are infatuated with technology, but we haven't been taught, or we've been misdirected away from our inherent spiritual technologies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the other path. One doesn't need to be a Luddite and eschew all technology. One can keep it in its place and use it for what it brings,
Correct.
the gifts that it brings, without co-opting their spiritual development by saying, this is the path I'm going to take and want to take, and merge more and more and more with technology,
Mm-hmm.
inject it into us.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, Ray Kurzweil posited in one of his videos that in the future, through miniaturization and through the understanding of the human genome, that you will not have a phone, you will be a phone, that you will be able to take an injection and the Google chip will work its way through your biology, implant itself in all of the right parts of the brain, and automatically connect to the Wi-Fi and update itself, and you will now have your Google phone within your brain.